This is Supermain. Welcome to Godfall 101.
Welcome to Godfall 101, you venerable Valorians. Well, here we are. Godfall's launched. I've avoided all reviews, scores, and impressions by all other major and smaller outlets. I've been dark on the internet for the last 2 days so that my impressions will be just my own experience with the PC version of the game. I have been waiting for this since the reveal in 2019, and I'm sure others have been anticipating the release since the announcement of Project Hyperion even longer than that. So what do I think of Godfall? The sophomore game from Counterplay Games, a brand new IP in the looter genre, and almost 1/3 of its development time was during a pandemic? Well, first off, I want to say that I'm sorry. I was 100% wrong on my assumption that this 3-player co-op game would have some sort of matchmaking. I was working off the assumption based on some of the communication we received from the team and things like the pre-order item, the Zodiac Night Lobby title. I was wrong and I apologize for that. I'll try to do better in the future. There's no matchmaking in this game. Everything comes down to how many people you have on your friends list. If you don't have friends, you're going to have to go find friends. You can do that at the various Discords that I linked in the previous video, but other than that, there's no matchmaking at all. I think this is a huge miscommunication by the studio and by the publisher. Saying we have drop in and out co-op and telling us randoms can't steal our loot are things you have to explain. You have to explain that randoms can't steal our loot because we won't be playing with randoms. We'll be playing with people we have to confirm to be added to our friends list. Why this wasn't communicated earlier is a huge question mark to me. So I want to talk about the story of the game. My comments will reflect the main story missions and some of the hunt activities. This was one of the things I was really excited about. The inspiration the team spoke about are some of my favorite works of fiction. The lead up with the 4 lore videos got me interested in the background of Hyperion, the Archons, and the Valorians. I think a lot of you watching this video probably have a knowledge of the lore up to now because you are interested in the game and have been following the lore. If a new person picks up Godfall and knows nothing about the game beforehand, I'm afraid that the story will seem like a paint-by-numbers revenge story. The hero wants revenge on the bad guy, and he has to fight mini-bosses until they get to the bad guy, and if they don't stop the bad guy, the world will end. Unfortunately, that is the story presented in Godfall. There are small nuances that take place, but ultimately they have little impact on the main character and their motivations. And again, if you know the backstory of the Archons and the Valorians, it does make more sense, but if you do not, it just seems very shallow on the surface. There is very little supporting cast at all in the game. The 2 companions we meet in the very beginning of the game have a few lines each and never return except for one very small exception that has little consequence or any impact in the story. Otherwise, 2 other NPCs are introduced, they join the team, and you speak with them after each mission, and each conversation leads you towards the next mission, with very little information about the world, your place in it, and what the consequences of your actions really are. There are lore items you can pick up in the world and get more context, but I don't think that changes the overall story of Godfall that players will experience. I'll be diving into as much lore as I can find and give more impressions later and see if the endgame content adds anything to the story. Talking about Godfall is interesting because it feels to me that Godfall started out as a different type of game. I can see the Dark Souls influences in the game. I think the boss battles and even the mini-bosses really are the best part of the single-player campaign. The bosses have very unique animations and behaviors, forcing you to learn their attack patterns. And even when I was struggling with some of the bosses, I was still enjoying my time. I never felt like the fight was unfair, just that I had not learned it yet. So I can feel the Dark Souls influences in the design. Fighting bosses in Godfall is a lot less punishing than fighting bosses in Dark Souls and failing. In Dark Souls, every time you fail or you die, you start over and the boss returns to full health, causing you to start the fight all over again. In the main story campaign of Godfall, this is not the case. Bosses have certain segments of their life, and if you deplete a certain portion of their health bar, they will remain at that health, so it is a lot more forgiving, and eventually you can brute force your way through the boss fights by dying and coming back and whittling their health down a little bit each time. I think this is an intentional conceit by the team in order to make the game more accessible. I know the accessibility issue of difficulty in a Dark Souls is something that is very sacred so that's something that I'm not even going to touch on here. Suffice it to say, if you're not a huge fan of the Dark Souls genre because of the difficulty of bosses, I think you will still enjoy Godfall's boss fights. And even though I am playing on PC and not the new PlayStation 5, which supports next to no load times, the respawn load time is almost instant. It takes about as much time for the button indicator to fill up than I am back into the game. There are also 3 difficulty settings as well. Medium is the default experience for the game. However, it appears that you can get the same quality of loot from playing on easy as you do on playing on hard. Maybe you just get more quantity of loot when you're upping difficulties. And as far as loot goes in this looter, there is a lot of it. From the first hour of the game, I spent my time exploring the realms, every nook and cranny, breaking jars and finding chests, discovering old Valorplates and their cores. Loot rains like a slow and steady downpour, and the explosion of items from chests and bosses is really satisfying. After the initial joy of strolling through the different realms wears off, when you open a chest or break a jar, the contents do have a delay from when they appear on the screen and when you can pick them up. Oftentimes I would run by a jar breaking it and continue on past thinking I collected the items when I really had not, causing me to backtrack more than I would have liked. This is a small nitpick, hopefully something that can fix in the future, but I did have to backtrack quite a few times. Exploring the realms was a lot of fun at first. The environment designs are really well done. The artists have done a fantastic job. Areas are bright and colorful and look really sharp. The game looks beautiful and is well designed. However, I did find myself not really wanting to explore more because of how similar everything looked. The game does give you an objective indicator so you know where to go at all times, but the game also lacks a map of any kind, so getting familiar with the specific realms is going to be really difficult. But I also don't know if it's necessary either. Every time you load into a mission, collectibles reset and you can grind away at collecting the realm-specific materials that you will need to improve your gear. These collectibles are presented like floating heart pieces from The Legend of Zelda or Ocarina of Time. This gives me some feelings of nostalgia from collection games of days past, but also makes the game feel a little dated to me at the same time. The realms are filled with their respective enemy types and combat is never far away. There's always something to fight. And these fights are also easily avoidable if you feel like completing a mission objective and collecting the rewards at the end. And this was something that I will admit that I did. During the main story missions, there are 3 points in the story where you are asked to play missions in order to earn a certain material to progress the main story. As I was wanting to complete the main story, the chore of having to return to these realms to complete objectives I had already done previously was a pretty big drag for me. I had just spent several hours in the area beating bosses and enemies, and I was not anxious to go back. Now I know that I have a lot of exploring that I need to do in the realms. There is free play activity that I need to do to dive into the world and really uncover the secrets that Godfall has to offer. But moving over to the combat of Godfall, and this is where the game really shines, combat in the beginning of the game is as easy as mashing the light attack button over and over until all the enemies are dead. In earlier videos, I had pointed out that the enemy AI behaviors and how they look like they were just standing still, not knowing exactly what to do. Well, that still happens, and it happens throughout the game in some instances. You might encounter an enemy that seems to have forgotten why they were even in the water realm in the first place, having some sort of identity crisis. Fortunately, things like that do not really interrupt the flow of the game. You dispatch that enemy and you move on. There were times during combat where I had to be smarter about how I approached a pack of enemies. There were enemies that would make others impervious, forcing me to attack them first. Long-range enemies that would make moving around the battlefield a little more difficult. Enemies that would drop down AoEs that would apply damage over time stacks onto my character. Towards the latter half of the game, I started really having fun with the combat because it started to force me to learn the interactions and behaviors with every enemy and start to figure out ways to dispatch them. The combat is fluid and feels like you are always in control. even if you don't have those fancy adaptive controllers. The 5 weapon types feel very different, and the different weapon techniques, combos, and timings might have you feeling like you're playing a fighting game at times. It is easily the best part of the game. From animations to the sounds of combat, mastering Godfall is something that I am looking forward to. I grew to love a very specific greatsword and its ability to create an exploding ghost every time my soul shattered an enemy, which would send an impressive amount of visual effects into the air. Doing this repeatedly was very, very satisfying, and it made me look forward to finding more gear that would help me soul shatter more effectively. I think most players will find something to like about the combat, and like other games in the looter genre, the story will just be something that fades into the background, replaced by their own stories they created with friends in the game. I do think that there's a playstyle in Godfall for most players. Between the 5 different weapon types and all the different abilities weapons can come equipped with, I do think that there will be something for everyone. The shield was something that really surprised me in the game. It really is an item that you will be using a lot. From staggering enemies, blocking projectiles, and collecting items in the world, it's something that players will want to become intimate with. Okay, just a few things before I end the story review and gameplay impressions. I finished the campaign in 14 hours and hit level 34. I unlocked 11 of the 12 Valorplates and still have some of my augment constellations locked. During the campaign, I don't feel like the Valorplates you had equipped really made a difference at all during those missions. Their different abilities didn't really change things enough in the early game for me personally. I played all 11, and other than looking different, it just didn't matter. However, I'm sure it will in the endgame content when you start min-maxing for their best build. I don't think this is a problem. All looters really have you running a patchwork of gear. You equip the latest thing that you pick up to make the numbers go up during the campaign until you hit the end game, and then the game really starts. Some of the Valorplates Archon Furies are pretty cool. Others just send out a wave of damage, and visually they are unimpressive. But again, I think they really are built for the end game, so I can't speak much about that now. As far as accessibility features go, there's not a lot. There is a spirit mode that you can toggle on and off that allows you to see key items more easily. I was also surprised that there isn't a colorblind mode in the game. There are subtitles though. You can also turn on the lock-on camera feature in the menu to help keep enemies in your sights. But other than that, with all the information that is being portrayed on the enemy health bar, I couldn't find a lot of features that would help people that wanted to mess with those settings at all. In closing, I think Godfall will be carried on the back of its endgame. The story campaign is an extended tutorial to get you to learn the systems and get used to combat. I was unimpressed by the content of the story. I was also frustrated that the amount of times I had to backtrack to areas I had already been for what seemed like the purpose of padding out game time. So if you are purely looking at Godfall for a single player campaign, I am sad to say that I cannot recommend it, especially for $60 to $70. If you are looking for a more skill-based looter slasher that you can play with 2 other close friends and try to push your way to the top of the endgame and grind for weapons and materials, I think you will enjoy Godfall. The loot system is very deep. From my gameplay so far, I'm not sure if there are specific loot tables for each boss or for each realm. Discovering those things will come with time, and I will be spending more time in the in-game activities to see how they play and get my feet wet in order to do a deeper review of the endgame. So even though I was disappointed by the story itself in Godfall, I was still having fun engaging with the combat of the game. Trying new weapons with new abilities and learning the different attack patterns of enemies, mini-bosses, and the main bosses was fun. At times, I felt like I was playing a Souls game and getting punished for playing too fast, forcing myself to watch and learn and adapt. That part of the game was a lot of fun to me, and I hope to find more of that in the endgame content. Alright, thank you so much for sticking with me to the end of this video. I hope it was helpful and you got something out of it. Whether it made you decide to buy the game or not, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more Godfall content in the future, and as always, please be kind to each other.